Um, Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Mr. Claudio Vogt, first of all, for giving us the opportunity to be here. Um, we are dealing with the Shanghai topic. Maybe that's one reason that we are not really um, filled up to the brim with Hong Kong interest. But you will find it, nevertheless, Shanghai is a very interesting city, also in regards to art. I also would like to thank the Creative Media Center of the City University Hong Kong, who shows our work, which has the advantage that it is technically very perfect and impressive, but unfortunately not on this premises. So people will not know the work we are talking about. I'm going to show later on a kind of trailer so that you know what we are talking about. But with this, I would like to introduce Mr. Rolf Klünter, who is going to do something like the moderation for our discussion, and Mr. Zhang Enli as one of the Shanghai artists who appear in our work. So, as an introduction, Mr. Klünter will
Thank you, Lothar.
some ideas.
Thank you for the introducing word. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Warm welcome to the Shanghai Salon talk here at the Art Basel. We are talking today about the making of the arts in Shanghai, past, present, and future. It's a very big thing. Shanghai is the other metropolis here in China who is having a very strong recent history on contemporary art development. Our talk is based on three components. Component number one is 40+4, a media work by Lothar, Davide Cadrio, and Zhu Qiaowen. They produced a film in 2007-2008 on the basis of the happenings in Shanghai between 1980 to 2008. We have here also Zhang Enli, a very prominent, outstanding Shanghainese-based artist who has very much evolved in recent years. He will stand for the experience of Shanghai as an evolving, strong metropolis. My own film was done in 2012. It's called Shanghai Soulmate. It's also being screened in the School of Creative Media at the City University. I did this film in 2012. And my entry point in Shanghai with this film was the question about empowerment. I worked with 18 art professionals who were very busy in Shanghai, and I tried to discover how these 8 people empower each other. But first of all, let us talk to the basic work of this discussion, 40+4. Lothar, you have prepared some very solid materials here for our audience. Would you give a brief historic survey?
This is the title of the work, which was started in 2007. I myself, I should explain that at that time I was for about 3 years in Shanghai, where I was teaching media, television, film, and media art. And during my first experience there, I came to the conclusion that it is extremely important to introduce art to any kind of media education. Or design education for that matter, and I had more and more contacts to the art scene in Shanghai. At that time I cooperated with an institution which was called BizArt, consisted of several artists. One of them was an Italian sinologist and artist himself, curator and art manager, we could say. His name is Davide Cadrio, by now quite famous in Shanghai for the curatorial work he does there. And together with this non-for-profit institution, as it was called, we started out to think, how can we understand the art scene in Shanghai? At that time, between 2000 and 2005, the art scene in Shanghai was somehow very ambiguous and in a way insecure. I'm going to mention a number of events which were all typical for the mood and the tension which existed at that time in the art scene. So there were a number of shows and exhibitions done by small groups of artists, significantly always artists consisting or groups of artists who were international and Chinese. So this kind of mixture, I have to explain, belongs to the tradition and the history of Shanghai. Shanghai is a very open and up-to-date city since the 20s and the 30s, always interpreting art and movements and ideas from the West, never really copying that as it looks on the first sight. So in this situation, the time from around 85 till 2000, there was a kind of orientation, or at least the search for orientation and the search for hooking up to what was going on in the world. Then with the change of the millennium, 1998, 99, there were some significant artistic events, exhibitions. The first one worth mentioning in our context is the Jianwan Road 310, where these artists, Xu Zhen, Alexander Brandt, who is also called Fei Pingguo, flying apple, he calls himself in Chinese, and Yang Chenjong and other artists opened an exhibition which, as it was used or normal at the time, was closed down by the police right away. 1999, the famous Art for Sale exhibition, which was the first time that really international and Chinese, not only artists, but also companies and interests supporting that exhibition got together. Also, because of ambiguous reasons, was closed down again, because in the background of these kind of movements was always the fear of settling structures which were not necessarily welcomed by the situation in the city. The famous Fuck Off and very problematic exhibition was another incident like that, which created considerable unrest and consequences for many artists participating in that. Another unusual exhibition, 2002, was not necessarily closed down, but also irritated many people. Just like the exhibition March 6th in 2003, which had the idea by Xu Zhen at the time that 100 farmers, workers, unemployed, and university students in striped pajamas followed every visitor and followed them through the exhibition. So this kind of irritation was at that time typical for the mood of the situation of the arts in Shanghai. The next exhibition, as you can see, 62761232, consisted of a whole group of couriers and bicycle drivers who were carrying the exhibition to the people who by telephone could order one. So this was also a very unusual and irritating form. Next one. The last and most important one in this row of exhibitions in Shanghai was Solo Exhibition, which consisted of 38 solo shows and had also a combination of interest and structures, like as you can see there, Biz Art as this non-for-profit gallery. It was not the right term, gallery, but it's an institution which is dealing and fostering art. The Duolon Museum and the Zendai Museum, which were both, the Duolon was a state museum, Zendai a private museum of a real estate person, created a kind of problem for the structure which was consisting of this mixture of public and private interests, which was always very irritating at the base of art politics and art management in the city. So this kind of unstable structures, as the city used to call that, again generated this closing down, in this case very drastically after 10 minutes of the vernissage in an unfinished factory building. the power was shut down and the exhibition was closed. After these kind of irritating events, there was suddenly a movement which was very surprising. The city founded something which it's called e-art, Electronic Art Festival, which was supposed to be yearly, and it included all locations all over the city with big electronic and media projection installations involving the entire city and all the institutions, with a very heavy emphasis on international participation more than on local participation. But that was a kind of breakthrough because the city took the initiative of solving this ambiguous, insecure, unsure situation which consisted till then. E-art operated for several years actually as an institution like that. It was conceived, organized for a while, and done by Victoria Lu, together with the MOCA in Shanghai, which is also a private museum owned by a Hong Kongese person. So e-arts then was converted into a company and went broke right away. So there is nothing left of that. But during this 2008 event, our 40+4 had a first Chinese appearance, and in a place which was quite spectacular. This is the Chijiahui Plaza in Shanghai, one of the biggest commercial centers, with a whole ring of very huge advertising screens. This glass ball is one of them, but the other ones are big screens. This screen is something like 30 meters in width up at the building, and we were able to run our show for one night, afternoon and night, in a week of e-art works which were showing there. This is flipping a little bit independently. So this work was done and shown first for a show in Italy, Florence, which was called China, China, China. And there it was shown as an installation with many screens, but not as an interactive screen. We did this later on. We started to form a panoramic screen. This is too hectic, just a minute. So we had, as an investigative project, started out doing interviews with 40 artists from Shanghai. The only common element they all had was that they was living and working in Shanghai, but they were of different types and different ages and different styles. We did, with a team of 40 interviews. The curator was Davide Quadrio, who I mentioned before. I was a cinematographer and cameraman, later on also editor. A former student of mine who is now an artist, media artist in Los Angeles, Zhu Xiaowen, did the editing. And we had one fourth person who was the announcer, because we had worked out a set of questions which were very rigidly presented to all the artists in the same way. And they were allowed to answer strictly to these questions. The set of questions was dealing with the personal life of the artist, their view about the art market and the developing of the Chinese art and the art market, with their relationship to ethics, to responsibility, a little bit to politics, but basically dealing on the level of everyday problems and not of on the basis of very philosophical points. So this we all montaged into several screens, and now we have a panoramic presentation, which is certainly 360 degrees, consists of up to 50 screens, which are either with faces or with titles, and it is possible in an interactive way to select either the person and listen to the interview of one person, or to select one question and you can collect all the answers of different artists to that. In this way, it is showing in the Creative Media Center of the City University here, and it's worthwhile to go there. It is going to show for quite some time. This is the card where you can find the information, and in that respect I can mention that Mr. Jeffrey Shaw, who is the director of that institute, who is also here, I see, has a number of projects which are in a way similar to interactive panorama and other settings, which can be visited and seen in the Alive Center. If anybody's interested, we can deal with that later on. In this respect, I would like to show, so that you get an idea of the movement, a video that gives an idea about the workings. Very rough idea, but we should look at that before we go on with the discussion. So if we can have the video, the MP4.
这个是好像很奇怪一个问题。我想，艺术家最好的风度就是他做出的风度。这个问题我回答不起来。
好，我们是缺钱什么大手，就是你只想做自己的作品就可以，我也不要穿的特别好，就。
人人都会腐败，我也这个是一个命运，就是说没有人可以逃避的，也不可能永远像年轻的时候这样简单的生活。
我经常上网找各种各样的照相机，我几乎所有的来源的就是说费用的，我所有的钱都基本上花到设备上去，这算不算腐败呢？我不知道。
你没想过？
有吧？
没想过就不知道有没有。
你肯定想过，
真没想过，你想几次不知道什么叫责任感，所以就没想过的。
那比如说的话，你就当艺术家了，
可能是好玩嘛，有趣。如果说有责任感，也是顺便。
这种责任就像你刚开始说的问题，就是说你相信自己的一些精神信仰。我觉得这项就是首先对自己负责，然后才对社会。我觉得这可能是对。
面对更多的公众，所以有一个责任。就是这样一个问题。但是你是不是真的面对公众了？ 所以我们自己为自己面对公众，我们自以为自己是艺术家，其实你没有面对太多的公众。没有，因为我没有太自认为自己是艺术家，我宁可觉得是个农民。我觉得很多艺术作品的对人的影响，完全不如网上我今天看到一条特别的新闻，就是说现实比艺术要强得多。
Yes, I think that this 4-minute clip gives us a quite interesting insight in the work we have done, Lothar. And maybe it's very important to mention that 40+4 is a work that will continue until June 22nd as part of the Run Shaw Creative Media Summer Festival at the School of Creative Media. Zhang and Enli, we have seen that you have been interviewed, you were part of this work in 2008. Since 2008, a lot of things has been happening in Shanghai, here in the region. We are now 2013, Art Basel Hong Kong first edition. Last year we saw the opening of 2 very large-scale museums in Shanghai, the Bauer Station Contemporary Art Museum and the China Art Museum. Both museums offer now a space of 55 and 40,000 square meters. Last year we have seen the Singapore Art Singapore, with a very powerful new scene of galleries. Can you share with us your experience as an artist-based, Shanghai-based artist since 2008, what has happened and how you see and how you reflect this film?
Thank you. This year, I have some photos of my art career. I think a change in the city can be reflected on individuals. So when you did some work 20 years ago, you didn't have any idea of time. But then, compared to now, I think you can have some idea from my work from the past 20 years. I think for artists, we don't talk a lot. You can just look at my works. The sum of my works started from 1992 to now. It's very quick. These are the artworks from my first 10 years. This is 3 brothers. So many artworks are from my memories when I was a child. So there's nothing in the box. This is myself. And some relations between peoples and 2 objects. Some lines. And imagination on the flat space and 3D space. It's a space with nothing in it. Art gallery. This is Western painting. This is one part of exhibition. That was in 2007. It was established in a small space. So I copied a room I used to stay in. So I use watercolor to paint all the paintings. I draw many artworks that are covered by objects. I always observe the relationship between two objects. This is a floor, foot of movement. It gives you some implication. This is a bucket, a water bucket. So it has been preserved by Tatter. This is the washroom. Some lighting. This is one of my paintings. A tree in winter. Some flats. This is the art gallery. Display some of my artworks. This is a corner of the wall. Some liquid. Some work from my early stage. Some artwork related to life. Blood drop into the water and flow on the surface. Some basic objects. At that time, when we arrived in Shanghai at the end of 1980s, we only have matches at that time. There's no bed for us. This is actual space. This is artwork being done in Guangzhou. Shanghai Minsen Art Gallery, we duplicate a workshop, and this is a demolished ditch. These are some artworks from recent years. Some wires. This is in Basel. In art gallery, there's nothing in it, just some water markings under the window. This is in India. It's abstract painting done in India. There were 4 spaces. These are some my recent works. Some portraits. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zhang and Li. Your work offers us very nice insight in a poetical landscape and atmosphere that is swinging between, in the beginning, figurative art and swinging to abstract, and then to objects of daily life which have almost no importance, but you portray them and you make them important. I have a question. This shows a little bit your very personal encounter with this world, with realities in Shanghai. This is very individual. Lothar has presented a film, media work 40+4, which shows 40 Shanghainese-based artists. It seems to be that it projects a group, a sort of Shanghai school. My impression always was, during the last 12 years living there, that Shanghai has nothing like a group, a style, a group style, but is based on very individual statements, like your statement, your artistic statement. This is the contrast of, this contrast Shanghai from Beijing. In Beijing we see groups. Can you share some ideas about this, how you feel about it, in context with Lothar's work?
Actually, so we try to find the changes in society with purpose or without purpose. Sometimes one people's strength is limited, but I think sometimes maybe the group can attract more attention from the public. But maybe after 10 years, they will just disappear. So sometimes I doubt that in 1980s or 1990s, there are many groups, art groups, but what their values are for myself. I have my own experience. I express those experiences through my artwork, and so I have never seen a group can exist for a very long time. So in Shanghai, because I live in Shanghai, maybe I more believe a personal change can be lasted longer. I think when something happened, I can experience it, I can witness it, and then maybe some years later, and I can express my impression at that time. So all the changes, just like water, when I have change, and it will have influence on the others.
When you did the film together with your colleagues, was this something like future telling? Was this a sort of activity, wish-fulfilling prophecy? Do you want to project the idea Shanghai as a group?
No. I think that looking at Zhang and Li's pictures here, I thought that among our 40 artists must be quite many who strive for staying alone as an artist and not as a group. Nevertheless, there will be always this discrepancy between common interest and individuality. And the history I try to sketch about Shanghai moves between these two positions. Certainly the artist is an individual and has, in a way, the duty to be an outstanding individual. On the other hand, there have to be groups towards the outside world of the artist. And the kind of group formation which our 40+4 work suggests that does not really exist, although Shanghai is remarkably active in trying to form groups, and there are several groups maintaining that groups are the thing of the future, and the individual artists disappeared in the jungle of mass media and so on, or in the desert of art markets. Why not? But I think that the group itself does not exist, and it doesn't want to exist, as it is shown in our work. We had a kind of sociological approach. We took anybody and we didn't count on any group formation. But it turned out that what we had in the end is a kind of landscape of ideas, landscape of artistic thinking and of artistic styles, which was very interesting. Our hope was that whoever walked into our work, even as a non-interactive installation, would come out with a very precise feeling and a very precise idea about what was happening in Shanghai without having any numbers or any hard facts. This is a kind of effect which you can achieve with media. You see a lot of pictures which are all very convincing, even and although they don't explain anything, they only show. But even images convey precise information which is not measurable by numbers or by hard facts, but they are precise and they give a precise idea. So that was our feeling. The next step, we are still working on it, would be to do a revisiting, because after 5 years, if we go to the same artists, some of them will be changed quite a lot. Some will be even richer now than they were then. Others might not be artists anymore. I'm not quite sure about that. But the next step would be part of this ongoing work, which I'm interested in. If you see the work in the Run Shaw Center, you will find that there is a very interesting contrast between having an overview over a large group of artists and having a very intimate kind of close-up to the single persons, if you want to. And this contrast between the overview and the extreme close-up, I find very exciting and very interesting. So I hope you go and see that.
In 2006, 7, 8, you focused only, or you interviewed only Shanghai-based artists, Chinese artists.
Yes.
And it gives the impression they were the only one in Shanghai doing art practice. But Shanghai, as we all know, was since the 30s, the 20s, a very international city, always reaching out. There was always an influx of international movements. Shanghai reflected very much international art scene already in the 30s. I like to recall Lu Xun, who went to Berlin in the early 30s and discovered in Germany the German artist Käthe Kollwitz. He took back this experience and some works and made her very famous in Shanghai. And he influenced his 5 students, his principal students, who then continued to do Käthe Kollwitz type of woodcut prints. And this continued actually also in the 80s. Many international art professionals came to Shanghai and interacted with Chinese artists. So there have never been a situation where only Chinese artists are in practice. How you see this? This would also be a little bit of my critique to the film, when I may, and this was also the reason why last year, at the time when in the making of the 2012 opening of the Biennale, the 9th Biennale, and the large-scale museums, I did my Shanghai Soulmates, in which I portrayed the interaction and the mutual empowerment of Chinese, Shanghainese-based and international artists. Please share with us a little bit of this.
Well, I always found that there is a very specific situation in Shanghai, one which I like, and that has to do with the internationality of that city, which I sometimes have the feeling is not very much liked within China itself. It always happens if you say that this and that is like this in Shanghai, you get always a comment that Shanghai is not China. Certainly is not China, definitely not, but it is a possible way for China. And there always is a slight competition in the field of art between Beijing and Shanghai, because Beijing is the big center where all the money, all the power, the politics, and also high culture is. In Shanghai is more pop culture. If there is high culture, opera, ballet, and things like that coming to China, it certainly goes to Beijing. The pop stuff goes to Shanghai. This kind of differentiation goes also into the field of art, and I myself find this very interesting, because it's a very lively, vital kind of atmosphere in Shanghai, and it reflects the historic awareness of the world outside and how to integrate and connect to that world outside. So all these activities which I mentioned were all done not necessarily by groups of expats and truly Chinese artists, but by groups which were including internationality, and I find this very important. I must say that this is also a personal experience while I was teaching in China, how important it is to open up thinking and living into that direction. So this is where his film comes in, and some other products, for example, this book, Shortcuts, which appeared now. Those films are dealing with this internationality. I think it's too risky to keep it up, since we are falling things here anyway. This internationality I find a very necessary idea for the future development of art, culture, and business is anyhow international, but we have to follow up with that in art.
Zhang and Enli, last question. Who you think is your soulmate? Sorry, I didn't get this translation.
I have a lot of soulmates. Of course, my brothers, my parents, it's been there for a long time. And they are actually not just for my soulmates, also for my mentor. So when I was 10 and 11, my first impression is that what I'm going to look forward to when I was 20 and the 40s. So for those feelings, so I can't really express myself because I am very much, with my childhood, I can't express more than what I'm looking for. So sometimes, for what I'm looking at this stage right now, and then when you're looking back to where we're in the childhood, and those are, it's a very differently, and I can express. So my soulmate, I can say this for my parents, my brothers. I'm not a really talking person to express what I have my problem. But then, it's a temporary, it's a realistic, it's a real. So because there's a lots of problems, so we are denial.
Okay, thank you so much. We have
can we have the other video running in the background?
We have this card here for display. You can pick up some. The book is available at Shanghai Art Gallery. Lothar's film and Shanghai Soulmate film is running, as we said earlier, during the summer festival of Ranranshaw Creative Media Center. And I think now we are open for questions. Please have some questions when you like.
Hello, my name's Marianne. I volunteer for Friends of the Art Museum, and I organize films and lectures for them at Chinese University of Hong Kong. But we deal with all old things, but in our films and lectures we try to also know about modern art and contemporary things. So earlier on you said that you tried to have some modern art shows and all that. They were closed down by the police. Then was there some other way that you could show it, like privately? Or that's it, 5 minutes and that was it?
Well, it's hard to say, sure. It's hard to answer because of different facts in China. Sure, you can show some pictures in your apartment and people do that. But if you want to make this public so that people who you don't know come, you would have to have a permission to do that. If you don't get the permission, it can be bad for you, right? So to get that permission, you have to go the official way. This is the way it works.
What about art reviews in magazines, newspapers and all that? Does that exist, that form of journalism?
that exists, but it follows the same rules. That it all has to be controlled. And certainly there are all kinds of attempts to underrun these kind of rules, and they are tried. Some are successful, but they don't get published, right? But if you want to have it like public, really, then you have to have a permission for that. Yeah, that has to be done all properly.
Excuse me. The next talk actually is going to be about art criticism, especially in China. So maybe that's when the best moment to, if you want to stay, then maybe you can ask the questions in the next panel.
Yeah.
So you say like this artwork did not pass the censors, essentially. So what kind of artwork passed the censors? Because surely you can't have a big city like that. You know, lively, international, and you don't have art, you know, because I think art in very simple ways, but very beautiful ways, can touch people's lives. And you know, I have a personal example recently. I went to a wedding, and after, friend's daughter's engagement party or something, and afterwards they said, you can take home the flower arrangements if you like. So I took home a couple. And then when I arrived back, it was late, and there was the watchman in our building, and he said, and I never thought that he'd noticed such a thing, he said, oh, very nice flower arrangements. So I said, here, I give you one. And he was so happy. And then the morning watchman came, and he said, oh, thank you very much, it was very beautiful. And I was very surprised. I didn't think that, okay, just say a flower arrangement as floral art. I did not know that it would make them so happy, and that they would appreciate it. And afterwards, when one or two of the flowers died, I just replaced it so that the arrangement could last longer. And he was telling me, oh, cut it a bit shorter here, look better and stuff. So, no, it's just a comment that, you know, there must be some other kind of art that passes the censor. What kind of art is that?
Well, this kind would pass very easily, I guess, but it's a long story and very complicated. In this case, it was not only how the art looked like, but it was what kind of interests were gathering together to form structures which were not accepted by the big structures. So it's complicated. But art is, like you explained, a very beautiful thing, if can be at least, I think.
Okay. So thank you very much for attending this talk. Thank you, Lothar. Thank you, Zhang and Enli. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
See you next year in Art Basel.